This week, I was supposed to be building the most amazing whiskey cabinet. However, we've just adopted this beautiful little puppy named Olive. Now, in order to keep her safe while I'm in the workshop, I need to build her somewhere to hang out. So we are going to build the most over-engineered and escape-proof puppy pen anyone's ever seen. Let's get stuck into it, see what we come up with. So Olive is a French Mastiff cross and she is going to be huge. All the puppy pens that I looked at online were just made out of the most flimsy materials and they were only about, I don't know, maybe 600 mil high at best. Now, because she's going to be such a big dog, and I have no idea how long we're going to need to use this pen for, I need to put a bit of forethought in. So it needs to be tall and it needs to be really, really strong. So here's what I'm thinking. I've got some 40 mil by 40 mil SHS that I'm going to use for the uprights. I've got some 40 by 20 mil RHS that I'm going to use for the top and the bottom. Then for the mesh, I've just got some of this black mini mesh, powder coated, which I think will do the job pretty well. It's pretty strong, should be puppy proof. Now, when I make these, I'm going to leave the uprights longer than what this mesh is because I've got something I want to try on the top that will hopefully make this still dog proof when she's bigger. Stop her from jumping out. She has got a bit of T-Rex in her, so anything's possible. Now, like all my builds, I'm going in with no plan. I've got a very loose idea of what I want to build and what I want to achieve. It has to make some basic requirements. It needs to be modular, so when we're not using it or when she's outgrown it, we can pack it up and put it into storage without it taking too much space. That way, if we ever need to use it again in the future, we've already got one. I'm the sort of person that only likes to build things once. So this is going to be a build that's in a constant state of evolution throughout this whole video. And a little heads up, how it starts is not how it's going to end up. But how it does start is by me making a series of panels that will somehow lock together, that can be pulled apart and put back together easily. The size of these panels is going to be determined by the size of that black mini mesh that you saw me talking about. So I've taken some measurements and I'm going to cut up some of this metal tubing to size. And to be honest, after that, I'm not really sure. I'm just sort of hoping that by completing this step, the next step will reveal itself. And I know this style of building freaks a lot of people out, but I'm pretty comfortable with it because it's pretty much how I build everything. The reason for that is I enjoy the flexibility and I find that it allows me to be a lot more creative in the moment. A lot of my best ideas come from overcoming challenges that pop up throughout the build. Now I've got an idea to create some kind of roller system on the top out of poly pipe. And the idea behind it is if she jumps up and puts her paws on the top of the puppy pen, the poly pipe will roll and she won't be able to get traction to be able to jump out. So before I go ahead and weld all these panels together, I need to drill a hole and then cut a little notch with the angle grinder so I can drop these rollers in. It'll be way too hard to do once the panels are welded. From here, the process is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to lay the pieces out, being mindful to put those two notches on the inside. Weld everything together and just make a whole bunch of these. Now you might be wondering why we even need a puppy pen. And it's purely for her safety. My wife does a lot of photography and uses a lot of lighting and stuff for her business. So generally has a lot of extension cords and stuff like that around. So when we're working, we need to make sure she's safe. The last thing we want is for her to bite an extension cord. And I know, yeah, I could put a run outside, whatever. We've got a lot of property, but we also have a lot of wildlife, including snakes and kangaroos. And the last thing we want is for her or any wildlife to get injured. So while she's unsupervised, she's better off inside. So all these panels are identical, except for the one where the gate is going to go. And all that means is instead of having a brace on the top and the bottom, I'm just going to mount two lower braces and then there'll be heaps of room for the gate to swing in without any people having to step over a brace. And to make the door itself, it's just a matter of cutting some more of this tube stock, welding it together in the same fashion, and Bob's your uncle. Now, earlier I mentioned that usually by completing one step, the next step kind of reveals itself. Well, in this case, it kind of didn't, but I had to persevere with the build. So the next step is working out how I'm going to attach these panels together whilst keeping it modular. So what I initially came up with was basically a piece of flat bar
with 2 pieces of 20mm by 20mm SHS welded to it. The idea was to slot them down between the 2 tubes and it would stop them coming apart. Now, this is going to be handy for a couple of reasons. I need access to be able to slip the rollers in and out. So I can't weld the end of these tubes closed. So I need something that's removable and easily removable. And the other thing is, if Olive does jump up between the rollers, I want there to be a flat surface with no sharp edges. I don't want her to cut her feet or her legs or anything.
So, this is kind of where we're at. I'm realizing now that it's a little bit small. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and make like 4 more panels. So instead of being 2 by 2, it'll be 3 by 3 by 3 by 3, if that makes any sense. Another thing, I made these little sort of pins to slide in and lock this together, but it's a bit janky and I'm worried that it's gonna spook Olive out. So I've gone and bought a bunch of these hinges and I think I'm gonna do it in 3 panels. So it'll concertina in and then in. So it'll be 3 sections. And if it's too big, I can still make it 9 panels rather than the 12 that it'll be. Problem with these hinges is they're split hinges. So I don't want the panels to lift apart. But I think if I put one hinge that way and then one hinge the other way, they shouldn't come apart because they'll be sort of pulling against each other. So yeah, go ahead, I'll put some hinges on. Before I do that, I'm gonna make 4 more panels.
So after the realization that that's not how hinges work, and it wouldn't matter if I flipped one upside down and one its normal way, they would still just come apart because they still separate on the same pin, I decided to persevere and use the hinges anyway, and I actually went ahead and put a bolt between the sections that I can take out when we do need to pack it up. Now, I didn't actually film that bit because the power went out and I had no lighting in the workshop. I just kind of had a little bit of natural light, but I will show you in the reveal. And I think adding the extra panels and the hinges was the perfect solution because it's way bigger, she's going to be way more comfortable, and the hinges make it way less clunky and sort of rickety. Now, I'm still going to go ahead and use those pins, even though I'm going to have to trim them down because they're hitting the screws that go through the tube from the hinges. It wasn't a waste of time, and this is kind of where building on the fly has its teachable moments. Although I'm not using them to lock the panels together, they still serve the purpose of keeping Olive safe. And it just goes to show that you never really know if an idea is gonna work until you try it out. And really, it's okay if things don't go as planned. You can always adapt. Now, I can't completely take credit for this idea. This is something that's been done for decades. You'll often see this system referred to as a Coyote roller, and it's something that they put on Coyote fences and here in Australia in dingo fences. And basically all they're designed to do is roll. When an animal gets to the top of a fence, there's no longer anything to give them traction. So their feet hit it, it rolls, and they slip back down the fence. So this is nothing new, this is just my adaptation of it. And the process of making these is actually really simple. All I did was took a bunch of 90mm stormwater pipe, I cut it into sections that will fit between those uprights in each panel, and then I went and found a hole saw that would cut a plug that would fit in the end of the poly pipe, put a couple of screws in it, and then to attach it to the top of the panels, all I'm going to do is put a bolt and a washer in each end, and as long as the diameter of the hole in the middle of the plug is bigger than the bolt, it should roll pretty freely. And I'm actually really stoked with how well these rollers turned out. And if you've got any feedback or any opinions on these rollers, I'd love to hear from you. So drop a comment, but personally, I'm going to give myself like 9.5 out of 10 rubber chickens. And from here, I'm just going to give everything a coat of black paint, and then we're moving on to mounting mesh. And I'd originally designed this in my head to mount these panels of mini mesh to the front of each panel with some screws and some big mudguard washers. But I quickly realized that that wasn't going to work because of the way I made these panels concertina. And the mesh being mounted on the outside wouldn't have allowed 2 of the 3 panels to fold completely flat. So to overcome this problem, I decided to mount the mesh on the inside of the panel instead of on the outside. Pretty much the same process. All I had to do was cut the mesh down.
I did pop in a little bolt here just to keep everything a bit more rigid. And I also added these little brackets with a cable tie just to sort of secure the mesh a bit more. That's it for this build, guys. I had an absolute blast making this, and I hope you enjoyed the build process. Ollie's really happy in here. She's just been coming in and out under her own free will. We are yet to shut the gate, so we'll see how that goes. Next episode is going to be my whiskey cabinet, and that's something I've been wanting to build for at least 6 months, but it's just been put on the back burner again and again. So I'm really stoked to get in the workshop, make some sawdust, and build something epic. So make sure you tune in, and until then, I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Peace.
Come on. Sit. Lie down. Good. Roll over. Roll over. A bit more. Good girl. Good girl.